Well, Colm, listen, thank you very much. You're very welcome here today.
Thank you.
And thank you for agreeing to be interviewed to our first Emerging Managers Lunch. I'll get stuck into it if you don't mind, and maybe I'll go back to the beginning if you don't mind. Tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, and a bit about the family background.
It's like blind date, yeah?
I hope not.
So I'm, Sil just asked me when I was born. I had to think for a second. So 1963, so that makes me 55 this year. I often get mixed up when people ask me my age because I often miss a year or two. It's just a habit I get into, and it seems to be increasing as time goes on, but it's one of those things. So I was born one of 6 boys, so I have 5 brothers. We occasionally meet for short periods of time still, which is nice. And I grew up in Clontarf with a kind of regular old family. An interesting family in one sense, in that my mum came from the very Republican side of the world. Her grandmother was first cousin of the O'Rahilla, and her grandmother was Aina O'Rahilla. And so they would have been very on that side of the fence, I suppose. And then my dad's family, with a name like Lyon, were kind of more infamous and allegedly connected to a cruel man by the name of Bishop William Lyon in Cork, who had a legacy of doing quite the opposite. But and so it was one of those kind of very mixed hybrid type Irish people, I suppose.
Okay.
Many of us are in some respects.
And what did your parents do?
My dad worked in Dublin Port and Docks Board as an administrative officer down there for 46 years.
Wow.
His dad had worked in the same place for 49 years, and his mum had worked there for 16 years. So we got many tours when, for your Sunday afternoon treat was a tour of the warehousing department of Dublin Port and Docks Board, which is now, of course, CHQ. And when we were kids, that's where we used to park the car when we went into town on Saturdays, and that was known as Stack B. And occasionally, he'd at Christmas and that, the guys there'd be lots of stuff left over in the warehouses from various consignments that wouldn't have been claimed or whatever. So we used to be able to see what all that was and all the unclaimed stuff. But those warehouses used to be full of unclaimed goods from customs perspective, But yeah.
Okay. So then moving on, you've worked in financial services for over 25 years before you set up Relex. Tell us a little bit about the different roles you had.
14.
14. My maths is bad as well. Okay.
Yeah. I went to college out in UCD, which was really good. I did commerce, and at the time it would have been the technology wouldn't have been at the forefront of it. We actually started using punch cards. I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember those, but we actually made holes in cardboard and threw it into a machine for it to actually cut your code. And then by the time I left, there was PCs there. So I was very interested in the programming, and I learned to program in a whole multiplicity actually of different languages, just almost as an aside. So I did COBOL and BASIC and Fortran, Pascal, all those kind of old-fashioned languages. And then I did a master's in what was management science, which was kind of mathematical programming. And I enjoyed that quite a lot. And then there were no jobs. So I think 3 of the brothers had gone, the 4th was on the way. That day, basically, most people would have emigrated. And I stayed for one reason or another. And you couldn't get work, so I worked in the college actually for about 18 months or so, just hanging around doing tutorials or whatever it might be, or doing lectures for the professors, which was interesting as well. And then eventually, just like the buses, there was no job, and then suddenly I got 3 offers at the one time, and I got an offer for a 3-month contract with the Ulster Investment Bank, and which everybody advised me to take. And so I took that, and then 14 years later I left. So,
okay.
And I was involved in kind of business analysis work, project management work, kind of implementation, mostly project-orientated type work, where you moved on to different parts of the organization every 3 to 4 years and maybe got involved in anything from business change projects through to systems implementation, through to infrastructure projects as well.
Okay. So at that stage and at that period of time, you decided to go out and set up on your own. At that stage, you were in Ulster Bank, was it?
Yeah, I was in the Ulster Bank at that stage.
Okay.
I had stayed in the Ulster Bank in different parts of it for 14 years, yeah.
So when you decided to leave Ulster Bank and set up on your own, what were your major concerns going out on your own at that time?
The Millennium Bug had just happened, so that was, as people say, one of the great big cons. So we had Euro before that in '99, and then the Millennium Bug. So the banks had these, not the banks, but many companies had these retention plans in place at the time, whereby a couple of years prior to that, you would have been told that if you switched your 1 month contract, your 1 month notice period for 6 months, we'll give you this extra money, but we'll keep it until March 2000.
Okay.
So everybody had this kind of lump sum building up, like a nest egg, and then in March 2000 there was a queue at the HR office when people were deciding that it was time to leave, And I don't think I had. I think for me the time had come because I'd always dreamed of having something, of being in business myself. As a young guy, I'd met John Teeling, and John Teeling had been a great influence on me before I went to college, during college, and he was a lecturer out in UCD when I was there, and I've stayed friendly with him since then. And I've always kind of that dream of actually being. I've said it before that you didn't think of yourself as an entrepreneur. You didn't use that word. You just wanted to be a businessman or a person in business, if you like.
Okay.
And that for me was always in my mind that I'd love to be in business. I'd love to be in business myself. And at the time, it was very clear that the retailers at Ulster Bank were certainly knocking at the door or wanted to sell online. And it was very clear that there was a problem there because the bank hadn't got an electronic way of actually processing those payments from the websites and authorizing the credit and debit card transactions. So you didn't think at the time, because you got this money which you had from the Millennium Bug, you have enough money to keep you going for a year, so you're okay. But then you spend that, and 3 months later that's actually gone, right? Okay. So it's kind of you think you're going to cut back, but you don't really. But I found I worked a little bit part-time as well while I set up the company. And
why was that? Was that just to give yourself a sense of security in terms?
Just for the money.
For the money.
Yeah. I was teaching again out in UCD. Went back to UCD, actually, just did some more teaching while I was doing it. And I just bit by bit, I think I did spend a lot of time talking to an awful lot of people about what I was trying to do. And I found that really helpful. So I spent a lot of time meeting people that I knew. I had a big, extensive network of people that I would have known, lawyers and bankers, accountants, people in IT, people in different businesses in Dublin. And I would have spent a good bit of time just trying to validate what it was that I was trying to do. And each time you get kind of reassured that you're on the right track. But the biggest problem was that we hadn't got the money to actually make it. So that was the big issue, I think. And my big worry would have been that, how will we actually construct it? Because it needed physical hardware, software development, and a place to put the servers. And there was actually a guy that I met who said to me one time, well, why don't you just ask for it for free, And it kind of dawned on me that was the best advice I ever got. And I tell the story, I just kind of made up, but it's kind of true in a sense in that there were 6 or 7 things that I absolutely had to have. And I remember going into the accountant's office and telling them that, that all the other people had agreed to help me. And by the time you got to the last person on the list, you stop lying because they all actually have agreed to help you. So I got the servers. I remember we got those on, I think, a 2-year credit free. We didn't have to pay for them for 2 years. We got the hosting free for 2 years. We got all the software free for the servers. We got the firewall software free. We got the internet server free. We got the whole lot done. And then Owen, who started the business with me and is now the head of product with Fire, he joined and he then developed the code, and we did the coding together. That
kind of leads me on to to a separate part, but very related. So when you set up a new business, getting the first sale is very important. And sometimes where you may not have your value proposition 100% correct, or you may not have a track record, what did you do to overcome that?
The first business we got was Direct Ski, and the fellow there, Dermot McNally, was the CTO at the time, and he was on an open email distribution list thingy, and it was a Saturday, I remember it well, and he was bemoaning the fact that like he couldn't get the credit cards authorized on his website, and he was looking for a solution to do this with one of the banks here. And I just responded to him, and of course you try to pretend that you've other customers live, but he knew that we didn't. He was letting on that he didn't know, if you know what I mean. So it was okay from both sides, and because we met him afterwards, and I said, "Did you know that you were our first customer?" And he said, "Of course I did," but maybe he didn't. I don't know. But he like, I was afraid to meet him because I didn't want him to know that, you know, it wasn't stuck together with sticking plaster, but it was close enough, you know, to what it was that we were doing. But the point is, it solved his problem, that he could now have a credit card, you know, page on his website, and he could now, you know, take money from people. And we found that AIB Merchant Services, who introduced us back for the conference last year, you know, AIB Merchant Services were the first bank that said yes to us, because what we had to do was we had to sit in front of them to authorize the transactions for their retailers who wanted to sell online. And AIB and ourselves like went on to process, Paul is here, I think it was 18 billion or something like that per annum, like through online sales, you know. And that started with like, you know, AIB saying yes to process direct skis traffic. And it's a credit to them as well that like two Irish businesses together went and built that volume of traffic. And most of that volume and that traffic that we processed, there was 28 billion going through it at the end, was down to international businesses who AIB and ourselves had jointly gone and sold to, you know. The first one is always tricky, but it's always the best one, you know, and you never forget the first one.
You never forget the first one.
No,
yeah.
And it's.
Does he still remind you of that?
Oh yeah, of course he does. Yeah. He's eternally like, I think I owe him for another 100 years or something. But it's a couple of deals that would have always stood out for me, and Direct Ski was certainly one of those. There was another one where the customer was going to install their own infrastructure and get connected directly to the bank, and we went. And we said that it was going to take Aircom, like, you know, I don't know, 2 months or 3 months or whatever to put in the lease line at that stage. And we said we'd give them our service free in the meantime because it was accessible across the net. And they're still a client today, you know. So those ones I like. The ones that kind of slip away a little bit and then you go back fighting for them are good, you know.
Okay. So can I ask you, as you were building your sales function in the organisation back then, can I ask you, what were the characteristics you were looking for within sales leaders at that stage?
I think I got the selling. I went on a journey myself, I suppose, with regard to selling and what selling was. And we would have spent a lot of time in the early days talking about selling as describing what we had made and what we had built and describing the features and the functions of our product. And then I can remember, I think it was Dave Stein or one of the books that and Enterprise Ireland were doing a thing called a Sales Star program, which was Strategies and Tactics for Accelerating Revenue, it was called. And I remember being on this course, because it was a sales course, and I remember the whole proposition about that message was that, like, it's not about what you're selling, but it's what the customer wants to buy. It's what you have to learn. And it took me a while to kind of get it, and then it kind of hit me one day, that's brilliant. Like, that's absolutely brilliant, because that's exactly what it is. And it's trying to understand what it was that the person wanted to buy and why he wanted to buy from you. And, you know, try to get that match with that in your head. And even still with fire, like Paul was here with me today, our CFO and COO, we were on a call this morning, like, and after the call, we spent most of the time talking about why he wanted to do this business with us, you know, trying to understand that.
Okay.
Because that really opens up so many more opportunities for you. And that, for me, was a great opening. So when I look at and talk to salespeople, I kind of zone in on that, like, a lot. Like, I'd be kind of thinking, like, why would people, and how do you make that difference between selling from a kind of functional perspective? Let me tell you about the great things that we do, you know, rather than trying to get out from the customer maybe the reasons why he wants. Because we could have, even with fire today, we find that people buy us not because it's, you know, the best sterling and euro account that you can get and the best debit card that you can have.
Get the plug
but,
in, yeah.
Yeah, but they buy it because, maybe they have staff and they need to control their expenses. Maybe they're selling into the UK and they need to get a cheaper FX rate. It's completely different reasons as to why. And the guy this morning was about, we needed to automate the reconciliation and he needed to create a more streamlined operations function. So unless we understand those reasons, there's no point in opening up the book and say, let me give you a presentation about fire, because I haven't a clue why you're buying it.
But can I ask you, bearing that in mind, do you think that second time around that you've changed your approach and changed the journey that you went on terms of that?
We were very lucky, and luck plays a big part in everyone's journey, and certainly in mine as well, that the team that we had, the senior management team, were very cohesive. Very much aligned and very much driven towards very high standards of service, high standards of operation, high standards of presentation, and high standards of just engagement with customers and with prospects and with the banks as well. So we were fortunate from that perspective. Sorry, where were you?
In terms of how you, let's say, the way you have sold now, would that have been different to when you would have sold differently when you were Relax compared to where you're on Fire now, Fire.com?
I think what we learned in Relax we're probably applying better now.
Okay.
I would think, and I think certainly over the last while we have found the creation of the sales function, which is in London, and we opted to put the sales function in London because just really access to the UK market is just better from there, and Relax had 70% of its business, I think, from the UK, and Fire is already around that size of thing as well. It's about 70% of our customers are UK based. And the UK is a really, really important and a very attractive market because of its scale, but it's also very easy, I find it anyway, easier to do business there than, say, going to other countries.
Well, based on that then, what you were saying, can I ask you, so you've set up an office in London. So obviously with Brexit, many companies are going the other way. You're bucking the trend. Explain that in terms of your rationale behind that.
The day that Brexit came out was very early days. So we only launched the business account last year, I think it was. Yeah, early last year, and maybe late the year before. And Brexit was the day that we had more customers sign up than ever before. So selling euro accounts at the moment in the UK is actually quite a lucrative product because every UK business is looking for, is happy to have accounts in euro, accounts in sterling, and the ability to have multiple accounts. So why did we do that? For me, Brexit, I cannot, as an Irish firm, I cannot see us surviving without access to the UK market.
Okay.
It just won't happen. We're not going to go anywhere if we don't continue to have access to the UK. So we have to have it. And I think what we worked out was, what we determined, I think, was that the best way to do that was from there, not from outside it, but be there now. The implications for us are pretty clear, in that our license to do the service that we do is we're regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland. We are licensed to do 5 or 6 things, and that license that we have is passported to the UK. If Brexit is hard, then we will no longer be able to sell those services in the UK unless we're regulated in the UK. So our path to being, if you like, for Brexit would be to apply in the UK for a license, this year sometime, which means that we'd be licensed for our UK activities by the FCA in the UK, and then licensed for our European activities by the Central Bank of Ireland. So it's an overhead, and it's an administrative overhead. It's a cost, but but what I'm just doing is trying to find out what is it that I need to do to continue to scale the business in the UK.
Okay.
Because that's the most important thing, right?
Okay.
Is getting more and more businesses signing up in the UK.
Okay.
Because it's really attractive.
Can I ask you just again on the UK, do you find any difference, or is there a difference in terms of doing business in the UK than there is, let's say, here in Dublin? We'd have many members who would have, doing business on both sides of the Irish Sea.
I think the opportunity to find distribution channels in the UK is obviously better because of its scale. So we found our distribution, what I mean is that we sell directly to people sometimes. So businesses will come to us and they'll sign up directly, but both historically with Relax and now with Fire. And I hope into the future it's distribution channels that we find. And the distribution networks that we find in the UK are naturally bigger and there's more of them. Okay. So again, I find that that's better. I find the UK is really, from a financial services perspective, and from how would you describe it? From a regulatory perspective, in terms of understanding the manner in which the regulation is implemented and by the regulator. So in other words, regulators will often take the same piece of legislation, but they could in fact apply different thinking to that legislation, which can have an impact on you as an organisation as to how you run your business. The UK is really clear. The UK is like adamant that there needs to be more competition in financial services. So the political drive in the UK, it was George Osborne a couple of years ago who came out with a great speech, and he said that he wanted to open up access for people and for businesses to more banking products from more competition, and it's all about competition. So I'm a huge believer in that, and we have to have competition in the market. And in the UK, we would find as a new entrant, even I spend 2 days a week at least in the UK, and I even yesterday at different talking to different people, when you describe to people what it is that you're doing, the schemes will say, we want to meet you. We want to understand more about it. We want to try and see how you're going to make it easier for our businesses over here to do business with each other, for them to trade with one another, for them not to have to use the products and services from the banks.
Okay.
So that the whole motivation there is to bring competition. They've 480 million in grants the UK has that it's now giving to financial services firms who are going to market with competing products.
Okay. I'm going to change tact a little bit. Can I ask you, how do you teach your team to sell?
I probably don't, but...
or maybe what did they say as to how do you teach them to sell, perhaps, another way of looking at it?
I guess one of the focuses that we would have would be on the planning, right? So I would put a big emphasis on sales planning. So what I mean by that is demonstrate. So if I think about the team that we've just put into London, and what have we done with them, we've kind of said 4 or 5 things to them that are really, really important. One is I want to hear, your product market definition. So define for me what the market is, the people that we're selling to. Tell me about them. Tell me about the problems that they have. Tell me about how you think our product's going to solve those problems, right? So they would be, write documents about that and bounce those back to us, and we would listen to those and try to understand and try to help them maybe and give them different scenarios where perhaps our product, our platform might solve other problems. So we would certainly encourage the team. I'm just thinking of the practical things we've done over the last couple of months in building the team there. Second thing we've done is we've asked them for the sales closing process. So show me the process that you're going to use and how you're going to make the leads. How are you going to qualify them into opportunities? And when they become opportunities, what are the 6 steps you're going to follow? And it's kind of boring, but it's not, because it's really, really important, right? Really important to be managing that sales process. And when did the emails go out? When did they not go out? When do you phone? When do you not phone? And why is he a corporate customer? And why is he not a business customer? So we spend a lot of time going through the sales process. Then we would go through our lead generation. So we go through how we get the leads into the top of the funnel. And yesterday, we spent a good bit of time talking about the elasticity of the funnel. So is the funnel, an narrow one like that, or is the funnel really like that, So how many of the guys do we need to get into the top in order for the guys to pop out the bottom? And we talk about all the steps in the funnel. So I think it's not really training in a structured sense, but we would spend an enormous amount of time talking through those issues with the team. And how do we know if we need to fill the top of the funnel, or do we focus on the middle of the funnel, or do we focus on the bottom of the funnel? And when should we do that, and who should do that? And as you pop different types of customers into that funnel, they all follow different paths, right?
Yeah.
So understanding that as well. So we call that sales planning, for want of a better term. And I suppose I like sales guys who like planning, because I think it really helps. I think it really helps. I think it's absolutely necessary. Dave Stein did say years ago that it was 90% of sales was planning, and the other 10% was good luck or something. But he said, it was literally sales is 90% planning. So knowing, and then we have a weekly activity report, which we call the war chart. And The war. Weekly activity review. Yeah, and it's a weekly activity review, which happens every Monday morning. And the guys distribute it on a Friday night. And then, so we know exactly what the movement is at all stages through the pipeline for each category of customer, including our channels. And we get that on a Monday morning, and we have a 15-minute chat with the guys about that. And then once a month, then we have our MMM, our monthly management meeting. And we go through in much more detail the flow through the pipes,
So it's an important element of the sales process of the business.
It's like there's nothing more pleasurable than looking at and working with a sales team and seeing those numbers go up.
Yes.
I mean, that is the best thing ever, because you spend like an enormous amount of your energy and your time trying to make, the product and trying to make it. And there's never any guarantee of success, and there's no reason why somebody would use it, right? And then when you find that people actually want to pay you for the service that you have, and they actually want to use what you've made, it's like if you're making crafts, it's the same thing. You make a craft and somebody wants to buy that from you, you have to feel good. So for us, I think that the real answer and the real moment is when you're signing up customers, and those customers love using fire. And that's what excites me, is but what then you get really kind of challenged by is like, how then do you scale that? So if we've got 100 customers going live per month, how do I make that 1,000 customers? How do I make that 10,000 customers? And what would you need to do to find that distribution to put more and more and more customers using this platform?
Well, actually, as you come onto that, how do you go about scaling the business to the next level?
Again, I was very fortunate to go on the Leadership for Growth program with Enterprise Ireland out in Stanford over the years. And one of the things that kind of has occurred to me is just the need for strategy, and I feel that we're a strategically led company. I think that when certainly with Relex and again with Fire, if you were to meet the key people in that organization and ask them about what we are and what we're doing and what we're trying to sell and what we're trying to make and what the roadmap is, you get the same answer from everybody. So you have this alignment between the management team and between the staff, which is very, very strong. And that's, being a strategically led company, it needs that. If you're going to really achieve your strategy, you have to have great alignment amongst everybody, particularly at the senior level within the company. You can't have people kind of thinking one way and then somebody else saying, well, I don't really think we should do that. We shouldn't really be chasing those customers. We should be going after these customers. Everybody has to be aligned. And you do that through the creation of the strategy. So we would document our strategy and update it probably every quarter. And it's quite a comprehensive presentation that goes through everything from the vision of the company, the mission of the company. It goes through the values that we have, the way that we expect people to behave. It goes through the proposition that we're bringing to market, the problems that we think we're solving, the definition of the markets, a product roadmap, and then it goes through all of our organizational structure and how we are going to control and govern that structure.
Who prepares that for you every quarter?
I do that.
You do that?
That's my job.
And who do you present that to?
I don't really present it. We kind of work on it together,
okay,
right? And then the management team will meet, and then the whole company meets, and we go through that. And that way then you just try to make sure that everybody is aligned, if you like. As a regulated entity, we have to, obviously, we've got extra controls and governance to make sure that those things are in place. And we've only 26 people. Yep, Paul is here today. Paul Davies is was the CFO with Relex Payments and is now the COO with Fire Financial Services as well. So I think we would review that with the team on a very regular basis. And even though we're a relatively small company, for me, having that strategy in place and communicating that strategy to yourself and to the management team and then to the staff is really important, because the worst thing you can have is a group of people who are maybe working towards uncommon goals or goals that are not aligned, because that's no good.
Okay. Can I ask you kind of on a similar level as well? I heard you mention a while ago that when you set up the sales structure within Fire.com, you did it in a much quicker manner of time compared to previously. Why was that?
I think what we had this time around was the first time when we were learning, we learned as we went through the job, right? So our previous office in Hammersmith, we had 25, 30 people there who were all involved in sales. And it took us a long time to build up that function because we were trying to work out the best way to do things. And certain things will change because you've got a different product, but then certain things remain the same. So what we found was that this time around, myself and Paul found that we didn't have to reinvent a lot of the process wheels anymore.
Okay.
The structure was there, the controls were there, the governance points are there, so there's no need for us to reinvent any of that again, right? It's just more stuff that we've built that we need you to sell. And and if the prospect isn't there, is not there, move on to the next one quickly. Don't be flogging the dead horse. When I think probably in the past we might have pursued people a little bit too much. Now we kind of say that's fine, move on to the next one and move on quickly. But we've been really pleased with the manner in which the UK office got up and running. It's very, very fast, and we found that getting people, again, a little bit like the buses. It was kind of like was nobody for ages. We couldn't find anybody, and then suddenly we found 3 guys that we just instantly knew we wanted to bring in.
Well, actually, that brings on to my next point. So, how do you spot and develop sales leadership?
Again, I think we would go back to the conversation that we have. I would try to find, people who have that innate understanding of selling being that, the customer's proposition, the buying proposition. If that to me is a no-brainer. I sometimes and people say, and we were talking about this before, that good salespeople don't necessarily become good sales managers, and that's been said over and over again. But my response to that is, well, like, good developers don't become good project managers either. That's the same really in a lot of professions. That good people don't necessarily become good managers. So you look for a completely different skill set, like in a manager, which a salesperson may have or may not have. Like, it doesn't, it's neither one thing nor the other. And some, like, we've got, people who've developed for us, and they are developers, and they've stayed as developers, and thank God they did, because they're brilliant developers, in the same way as you'll have salespeople who stay selling because they're great salespeople. And that doesn't mean that they should necessarily be managers. In any case, they can earn more than the manager anyway.
Exactly, yes.
Right? Yeah. So I always say, like, it's not about, like, the seniority in the hierarchy of the company. It's about, like, making sure that you're a really good fit to what it is that you want to do. And so we would, like, tend to have reviews with the staff on a quarterly basis, not an annual basis. So we tend to have one-to-one conversations with the team every quarter. And we're going through one at the moment, and it relates to, and then share options are granted on the basis of the performance review that we're currently going through as well. And I think that's really important too. But it's hard in a growing company to be clear about expectations, to be clear about goals, and to be clear about targets all of the time. So you have to kind of say to people, look, it's not school either. It's like, you're a grown-up as well, and there's an element of responsibility on you as an individual to make sure that you're clear about what it is that you should be working on, and you have to go back to your team leader, your manager, your bosses sometimes too, and help, like, in that process too. And the more that you can help to clarify things, and once you got really, really clear targets and clear expectations, I think it really works well, and good performance measurement.
Okay. From your perspective, what are, for you, the highs and lows of managing a sales team and sales professionals? Keep it clean.
It sounds awful boring in one sense, but like, it's, I think, like, the high is the win, right? So when you win, businesses, I know as an Irish firm, like, I remember when we won Aer Lingus, and I remember we had 5 people working for us in Monkstown at the time. And the guy from Aer Lingus, like, asking me, like, why would we process, €500 million through a company that has 5 people? And I think it's okay, because I said we've 26 servers, so we'd like 5 times as many servers as we had staff, And I said that's what you should be counting. But that was an incredible victory, if you like, in one sense, and that would certainly be a high for me. Virgin Atlantic followed on from that, and Virgin Atlantic was a great contract to win. And we won their worldwide business. So you could see people in the Caribbean booking a flight online, and that card coming back, as I said before, to the servers in Dublin. We would authorize it, with an American bank, and we were participating in global e-commerce as a small Irish firm. And that is really exciting. The low, I suppose, not from a sales perspective, but the low was obviously we had some, what we call in the trade, outages. An outage is when, the engineer arrives onto your data center and tells you that the disk on the disk array is hot swappable. In other words, I can take this out, put in a new one, and I can guarantee you nothing will happen, And of course, the disk comes out and all the lights go off, and and we're down, and the DR site doesn't work because we hadn't tested it in sufficient time. And we called the engineer, and another engineer, and we say, you got to come and fix this. And the part's not available, and we won't have it for a couple of hours. And there's literally nothing that you can do. That happened 2012, yeah. And that was by far our worst moment. That was like, a really dark time. It was really difficult. The management team was very wounded, I should say, after that, right? And the organization itself was wounded. We felt very much that we'd let people down, and we were very, we managed the process well in terms of communications and that. And what I think it was Gary or Paul, somebody said at the time, like, don't waste a good crisis, because like that's what you've got to try and do, is to learn from that. But it was really, really, really dark, and it was just after we moved into new offices as well, where we were all kind of excited about our new offices, and this was the absolute bottom. But what we did was, on the back of that happening, we designed we went to RIPE, which is the guys who control the IP addresses on the internet, basically, and we got our own IP addresses, our own range, and we built a service so that as retailers were submitting credit card authorizations to us when selling online, we ended up with 2 sites that were live the whole time, and we were able to load balance physically all the traffic across the internet to one physical location or the other, and we could close an entire data center and nobody would know anything, and no traffic would be lost. So the lesson for us from the crisis was we had to get over it. But building that, I can remember when we were selling the company, the different vendors coming to look at the big screens that we had up in the back of the wall. They're still there, and they could see it, and they could see the live configuration, and then it was what we call N+1. So everything within each data center, for every server, there's actually 3 of them. So in the event of one failing, there's still 2. And that was done all the way down. And many of the buyers that came to see us were saying that this was something that they had tried to do but could never get done. They were all like live backup, and or it was like DR sites. So it was never continuously live. And that was one of the great selling points, because when we sold the company, it was doing 28 billion worth of payments. We're going through it, right? Since then, I don't know. It's only hearsay because I'm not involved. But allegedly, at the moment, or from what I hear, it's north of 40 billion at this stage.
Okay.
And the Relex technology has now been rolled out to Canada and all over the States as well, to America, where the company that acquired it now uses the Relex Gateway as its premier kind of piece of technology for all its online retailers, which is a huge credit to the team that, that the value that they created was so vast,
Okay, Colm, I'm going to wrap up with 2 very quick-fire questions, if you don't mind. First, what would you do differently now?
Do differently now? I think with Relex, we possibly would have maybe gone to the UK a bit earlier, because we were maybe a little bit slow getting up and running there. And I think should have looked for the distribution channels as well, maybe a little bit sooner. Not to hesitate so much, perhaps, right, about that, because we were maybe waiting a little bit for the product to be a little bit more mature, when in actual fact nowadays, as I was saying there a second ago, I'm quite happy to take what we have today. And I know that, all this group over here will not sign up because we don't, say, support a certain feature today, but that's fine. This should not stop me from trying to get this group over here,
Okay.
So I think that understanding has improved a lot.
Okay. And my final question to you is, we have a lot of emerging managers in the room here, and they want to move up to director level within their career. Yep. If you were to give them one piece of advice, what is it you would say to the people here now?
Don't listen to me. Everybody's, journey. It's a bandied word, I know, but everybody's. There's a lad that we work with who's just springing to mind, Peter Ryan. I don't know if you know him. He was a county hurler for Tipperary, wasn't it? And Peter's a phenomenal guy, young fella, and he's visually blind and or visually impaired to the extent that he's classified as blind now after getting a disease. But he when you talk about your journey, and then when you talk to the likes of Peter, you realize you're nothing, compared to what Peter can talk about and the journey that he's been on, and it's just the turmoil, if you like, that he's been through as a young guy, and to come out now and to see what he's doing now. He's now a cyclist with in the Paralympics, and he's going for Tokyo in 2 years' time, and we're helping him with that. But it's brilliant, to see a guy like that, come up from, and I think, I would just, I think respect is a huge thing in business, and I think, it's one of those things that sometimes gets a little bit lost. And if I was, not that I should be giving advice, but I would always say to people, respect for, your customer, respect for your co-workers, respect for the people that you work with, and and keeping that together is to me is a huge important thing. And I see sometimes in some companies when they're starting out, an element of aggression or an element of kind of arrogance that really turns me off to people, I have to say. And I like people just to go back to be, just plain old businessmen, just make something that, somebody wants to buy, and sell it to them at a fair price and make a reasonable margin, and you'll be fine,
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please give a warm thank you?
You're very good. Thanks, Phil. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.